The East Side Gallery, the row of murals on remnants of the wall, is a popular tourist attraction in Berlin. One of the most famous of these is the one by Günter Schäfer, called Fatherland, showing a combination of the German and the Israeli flag. In one version, explaining that the artwork is a memorial against any fascist tendency, emphasizing two dates. One, November 1938, when the anti-Semitic pogroms marked the low point in German history. The other, November 1989, the high point, the fall of the wall, and the end to the punishment of separation for the crimes of Nazism, and the culmination of Germany's way back to the Western world, to redemption.
Kannst du mir eine völkerrechtswidrige Handlung Israels nennen?
Ich kann dir keine verurteilte und kein klar festgestelltes Kriegsverbrechen nennen, aber
das Gift des Islams, das erreicht die Köpfe der Menschen nicht nur im Ausland, das erreicht die Menschen auch hier. Und deswegen ist es so wichtig, gegen Radikalisierung vorzugehen.
Aber auch unter Umständen nach den Militärschlägen wird in Gaza so nicht viel übrig bleiben, weil Israel muss das Tunnelsystem, das unter der Stadt Gaza steckt, ausschalten.
Schäfer's message was officially communicated in the German parliament when it celebrated the 70th anniversary of Israel's establishment, pronouncing that the German fatherland, rising from the remnants of Hitlerism, cannot be reimagined without maintaining a deep bond with Israel. The story is simple. The more you support Israel as a German, the more you've come to terms with Germany's past. The Social Democratic Party leader said, quote, "By protecting Israel, we protect ourselves from the demons of the past of our own people." The Green Party speaker put it more succinctly. Israel's right to exist is our own. What about Die Linke, the left, the supposedly anti-capitalist, most left-wing party in the German parliament? Their speaker articulated Germany's special responsibility towards Israel, invoking philosopher Theodor Adorno, emphasizing, quote, "the moral obligation to do everything so that Auschwitz may not repeat itself." The conservative parties said the same, and the rising far-right AfD party with links to neo-Nazis would echo this vision. On this matter, the parties in the German parliament are more united than on anything else. If all of this seems absurd to you, that's because these politicians never actually speak about the concrete content of German relations with Israel. All this only makes sense if you realize that German discourse about Israel says less about Israel, but more about Germany. The history of German support to Israel is highly underappreciated because the world focuses more on the US. However, it was first and foremost the West German state, led by former Nazis in all of its institutions, that enabled the continued existence of the State of Israel. Without understanding how the German ruling class, along with its enablers among the so-called left, addressed its dark history through bourgeois propaganda, particularly through the fabrication of a hollow Erinnerungskultur, memory culture, it is hard to grasp the nature of Germany's obsession with Israel and its leading role in escalating militarization and fascistization in times of decaying imperialism, combining unhinged support for Zionism with the outsourcing of fake European guilt to the Muslim and Arab world, a strategy that has served as a linchpin for the rise of Islamophobia and the whitewashing of the Nazi past. Before diving in, I want to give a heartfelt thank you to everyone who supports the channel on Patreon. Your contributions make an incredible impact, helping to cover the countless hours of research and editing that go into each video. Every new patron counts, so if you'd like to support this kind of content, be sure to check out the link in the description. Thank you for making this possible. After World War II, through a special assembly of psychologists, sociologists, and anthropologists, the Americans were conceptualizing so-called de-Nazification, quote, largely as a psychological and cultural task, under the assumption that National Socialism was simply, quote, a type of behavior, a public attitude, and an effective relationship to the state, independent of those other political institutions. One such other key political institution was, of course, the system of private property relations, and the fact that fascism was crucial as an immune reaction to the global rise of proletarian power, as liberal politicians had intuited themselves. Winston Churchill would assign to Zionism the same function, as explained the video on left Zionism. This isolated psychological focus on fascism and anti-Semitism was a key mantle for the US imperialist project to help create a post-war West Germany led by former Nazi Party members in crucial institutions, saving all the titans of business who had profited from the Nazi Reich, with the chief aim to continue the fascists' goal with somewhat different means, to defeat the rise of communism. Israel knew, of course, that West Germany was still Nazified, but it respected the quote exchange dynamic unique to German-Israeli relations. In return for working with a still Nazified and anti-Semitic Germany, it received crucial material support. German financial help was the most significant in the first few decades, even more so than that of the US. Without it, Israel could not have built its state and win the first wars, as analyzed in the last part. Israel and West Germany would now both paint the Soviet-aligned Arab governments as the new Nazis, which would deflect from the Germans. Egyptian President Abd al-Nasser, for instance, was called the Hitler on the Nile. Anti-communism served to mask West Germany's seemingly paradoxical nature. Its state narrative still declared that it was only Hitler's small inner circle that was responsible. Support of Israel would deflect from its ambition to regain its imperialist strength through reintegrating hundreds of thousands of former Nazi officers, while claiming to leave the shadows of Nazism behind. It was only when the old Nazis began to die peacefully from old age when the Federal Republic of Germany would start telling a different story. In 1979, one certain American TV miniseries had aired in West Germany, which a third of its population watched. It was 3 decades after the Holocaust, when many Germans were confronted for the first time with the history of how the Holocaust was actually perpetrated not just by a small elite, but also by countless average Germans. This sparked a massive debate. Holocaust became the word of the year. In the last part, we ended with the Bitburg scandal on May 5, 1985, in which Ronald Reagan and Chancellor Helmut Kohl visited the cemetery where Wehrmacht and SS soldiers were buried, claiming to leave Nazism behind by putting Nazi soldiers and concentration camp victims on par, and thus blurring the lines between victim and perpetrator. So-called Holocaust memory in Germany, so often lauded by international liberal commentators, was established only in the 80s, after this scandal, when German institutions were still unwilling to confront their Nazi contamination. 3 days later, in reaction to Bitburg, one of the most influential events occurred, crucially influencing Germany's dealing with the past. It was a speech by President Richard von Weizsäcker, in which he called May 8 the day when the Soviet Union defeated the Nazis, as a day of liberation and not as a defeat.
Der 8. Mai war ein Tag der Befreiung. Hat uns alle befreit von dem menschenverachtenden System der nationalsozialistischen Gewaltherrschaft.
This did not reflect the truth, of course, since the majority of Germans did in fact experience the end of the Third Reich as a defeat. But how do you liberate a perpetrator? This rebrand of West German propaganda served the purpose of salvaging Germany's reputation by acknowledging that the could not have known story was a lie, as more and more people were aware of Holocaust history and German society's collective delusion. Weizsäcker conceded that Germans were guilty because of ignorance, but not because many of them actively participated, still holding onto the myth that it was only Nazi leaders who did the crimes.
Als Deutsche gedenken wir in Trauer der eigenen Landsleute, die als Soldaten bei den Fliegerangriffen in der Heimat, in Gefangenschaft und bei der Vertreibung ums Leben gekommen sind.
But the chief aim of this speech was something else, as expressed by Weizsäcker's quotation of a Jewish proverb, quote, "Seeking to forget makes exile all the longer. The secret of redemption lies in remembrance." Political scientist Daniel Marwecki writes, "Quite literally, it was an offer of national redemption through memory. It was an offer not to be refused." Meanwhile, the German pseudo-left in parliament stressed that it is not the US which should be the guideline to German foreign policy, but the responsibility of Auschwitz. Joschka Fischer of the Green Party and later vice-chancellor from '98 and former leftist activist of the '68 generation concluded in an article, quote, "Only German responsibility for Auschwitz can be the essence of West German Staatsräson. Everything else comes afterwards." Staatsräson is the reason of state, or more accurately, the maxim for state action. One of the most brazen examples of how this is currently implemented is the new decree in one German state, where people will have to pledge allegiance to Israel's right to exist when they apply for German citizenship. Invoking Auschwitz, the Staatsräson, and the supposed intent to prevent genocide everywhere in the world to justify German militarization became more and more popular and was soon taken up by the conservative right. Quote, "It is German Staatsräson that Hitler cannot be allowed to win posthumously." Another crucial work that educated people around the world about the concrete history of the Holocaust was American historian Roll Hilberg's The Destruction of the European Jews, the first comprehensive historical study of the Holocaust, finished in 1955. But in Germany, people couldn't read it until 1990, 35 years later. Why? Because the Munich Institute for Contemporary History prevented the translation of the book several times. At the time, many German historians, like the conservative Ernst Nolte, were preoccupied with excusing the Nazis by explaining that Hitler had reasonable reasons to suspect and jail the Jews, since the predominantly Jewish-led Soviet Union had committed a class genocide before, and that the Holocaust was not really that different from what the Bolsheviks did. Holocaust trivialization by pointing fingers at communist revolutionary violence was a normal thing and still among many liberals and right-wingers today. One crude highlight was when, after Bitburg, Alfred Dreger, a right-wing party leader, sent a letter to the critical American senators stressing the common cause between the Wehrmacht, the Waffen-SS, and the US Army, namely, the common fight against the Red Army. In what is now called the Historikerstreit, historians' dispute, Nolte's left-liberal opponents, like famous philosopher Jürgen Habermas, called this revisionism and argued that the Holocaust was both unique and German. We will soon get back to this guy. Anti-communism as a key tool to solve the dilemma of fake German guilt fell apart as the Soviet Union began its process of complete liberalization with eventual dissolution, and as China normalized relations with the US in 1979. The weakening of communist strength now enabled West Germany to annex the Soviet-aligned East Germany. After the so-called German reunification, the nation's narrative shifted. To quell fears surrounding the resurgence of a proud and revitalized German nationalism, a new story needed to be crafted. A story that would justify Germany's re-emergence as a proud, dominant imperialist power. For a time, communism had served as the convenient boogeyman, holding together the tensions of Germany's internal dilemma. With communism's collapse, something new was needed to fill the void. The threat of Islam. Following Germany's reunification in 1990, now having full sovereignty over foreign affairs, Israel looked at it with caution. In particular, the Zionists worried what would happen when the historically anti-Israel East Germany became part of West Germany. But there was no reason to be skeptical, as East Germany had fully succumbed to revisionism and softened its position on Israel over the past 10 years, with its parliament asking the Israeli people to forgive us the hypocrisy and hostility in the GDR's official policy towards the State of Israel. However, regained strength through German unification proved to be beneficial for Israel, with Germany remaining Israel's second-largest trading partner after the US until 2009, when this position was taken over by the People's Republic of China. However, it was not reunification, but rather another event that brought the Holocaust back to the forefront of German-Israeli relations: the 1991 Gulf War. Several German companies had aided Iraq's chemical weapons program, and Saddam Hussein's missile attacks on Israel evoked Holocaust-era associations with Germany and gas. The German foreign minister flew immediately to Israel to give them aid worth over 80 million euros today, and the most costly German arms export to Israel up to that point. This helped a production gap in the crucial arms sector of German industry, which was also important politically to reach higher military autonomy. But this whole affair enabled Germans to yet again paint the Arabs as the true heirs of Nazism. Within a climate of rising Nazi terror attacks against Muslims or Muslim background people, one particular right-wing sect that called itself left-wing would congeal and increasingly start focusing on the threat of Islamism, calling themselves the Antideutsche, anti-Germans. Renewed German nationalism worried them, and the intervention in former Yugoslavia, the first bombs dropped by an active German Air Force on targets since World War II, reminded them of a renewed Hitler-like militarization. Some then went as far as supporting pan-Serbist ethnic cleansing against the Islamofascist threat in Bosnia and Kosovo, de-Germanizing the experience of fascism to associate it closer with the second largest religious community in the world. They would then go on to demonize the actual communists in Germany in support of the Second Intifada, referring to the fact that Hamas had a leading role in it, linking it to the narrative that many Muslims harbored fantasies of a renewed Holocaust. This mirrored the intensification of Islamophobia among many so-called leftists in other countries after 9/11 to find excuses for US imperialist invasion. Like Christopher Hitchens in the UK, who turned into a liberal hawk using the concept of Islamofascism to justify dropping American and British bombs on Muslims to spread the supposed higher form of Western civilization, which must defend itself from being destroyed by Islamist barbarism. One faction around the anti-German self-titled communist Gremlitsa said on the impending US invasion on Iraq that possible attacks on Israel by Saddam Hussein obliged the German left to agree to the fall of his rule with German military participation. Anti-German justification for German foreign policy now came full circle. It is why people say that the group should correctly be referred to as ultra-Germans or Germans on steroids. These people increasingly merged with the establishment so-called center-left parties and painted Palestinian political groups as right-wing and Israel as a left-wing project, in which they differed from neocons in the US. And that's about it with the differences. Again, this development might appear mystical to you, but it becomes clearer if you remember what we said in the beginning, that German talk about Israel is less about Israel and Jewish people, but about Germany. In particular, the struggle to revive and reimagine a weakened German chauvinism. Even German leftists who are critical of German nationalism will often proudly defend Germany's memory culture as superior to other nations, disregarding its hollowness and obvious whitewashing function and the material reality that Germany is the second biggest supporter of an ongoing genocide. And don't forget that undermining the actual left from a supposed left is a common phenomenon and tactic in all countries. We've already talked about one famous instance where that was the case in Germany, and the political role of representatives of the labor aristocracy in supporting capitalism imperialism. Joschka Fischer's successors in the Greens have not only continued the shift from a universalist understanding of the fascist past to a particularist one, but have become its most vicious defenders. Green politicians in leading positions, such as current Vice-Chancellor Robert Habeck or Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, belong to the most aggressive supporters of Israel's genocide and the staunchest slanderers of pro-Palestine activists.
Meine persönliche und politische Meinung ist, man kann die israelische Armee kritisieren für ein zu hartes Vorgehen im Gazastreifen. Das ist aber nicht Völkermord. Diejenigen, die Völkermord begehen würden oder wollten, wenn sie könnten, ist die Hamas.
Wenn Hamas-Terroristen sich hinter Menschen, hinter Schulen verschanzen, dann bekommen wir in ganz schwierige Themenbereiche rein, aber wir ducken uns davor nicht weg.
Und das darf man so übersetzen, dass der Slogan "From the river through the sea" nicht bedeutet, dass dann die Juden Israel per Boot verlassen sollen. sondern das ist eine Auslöschungsfantasie. Israel Völkermord vorzuwerfen, ist aus meiner Sicht eine komplette Verdrehung von Opfern und Tätern beziehungsweise falsch.
Dann können auch zivile Orte ihren Schutzstatus verlieren, weil Terroristen das missbrauchen. Dazu steht Deutschland und das bedeutet für uns Sicherheit Israels.
Under the propaganda of feminist foreign policy, Baerbock funds the mass slaughter of Palestinian women. Right-wing lunatic journalists join her in her imperialist white feminism. One leading social democrat wrote influential books openly advocating for Islamophobia and arguing against Muslim immigration. It took the so-called left-wing party 10 years to kick him out. Today, both parties mirror the right wing in arguing for increased deportations. One far-right AfD politician and Nazi granddaughter even applauded the Greens for their racist policies and referred to the theory of imported anti-Semitism. But more on that in the next part.
Dass selbst ein Teil der Grünen inzwischen AfD-Position übernimmt, das nennen wir eine Zeitenwende.
After unification, the aforementioned German philosopher associated with the Frankfurt School, Jürgen Habermas, was instrumental in promoting a victim-centered, guilt-oriented approach to Holocaust remembrance. Acknowledging the past should serve as a proof of responsible German citizenship. In this effort, the 94-year-old leftist drew heavily on the influence of his mentor, Theodor Adorno, the leading member of the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory, particularly in his firm stance against attempts to downplay or diminish the significance of the Holocaust. It turns out, the probably best-known social scientist in Germany didn't learn his lesson. Just like the Germans who denied the genocide on Jewish people as it happened, he now denies that Israel is committing one, calling its war on Gaza principally justified.
Our proper moral, secular principles are sufficient in order to regenerate imbalanced social situations, and I shouldn't have to tell you what that means.
So you may ask, how can you read so many books about genocide, oppression, fascism, and hate, and still refuse to acknowledge a clear-cut case of genocide live-streamed on all devices? It's because you're German. But jokes aside, this dude put it slightly better. German political philosopher and historian at Princeton, Jan Werner Müller, who highlighted a profound paradox in Habermas's attempt to transform Holocaust remembrance into a form of negative nationalism, a kind of anti-nationalist nationalism. Quote, according to this view, Auschwitz was willingly recognized as a singular crime, but at the same time, this crime was jealously guarded as unique, almost metaphysical act which, yet again, had made the Germans a special people. Also, there was a cunning, quasi-Hegelian drive inherent in the view that Auschwitz had enabled the Germans to know themselves, or rather, their mythical essence. This nationalistic framework in Holocaust memory, even the negative kind, gave German politicians the perfect excuse to turn reckoning with Nazi atrocities into a celebration of national pride. As German President Joachim Gauck put it in a speech, quote, there is no German identity without Auschwitz. I actually agree with Joachim here, but for different reasons. So calling this whole affair a memory failure is not entirely correct. The hollowness of German memory culture is deliberate, arising from the systemic impetus to not properly deal with the essence of European fascism, arising out of a continuity with colonialism, then capitalist imperialism, using anti-fascist slogans to justify the support of current fascism, and as a cover-up for one's own genocidal warmongering. When SPD Gerhard Schröder came to power at the turn of the 21st century, he played a crucial role in transforming the notion of dealing with the past into an honorable quality of German society. Schröder tellingly declared in an interview that the new generation's readiness to confront their history would empower them. and that it created, quote, an opportunity to represent one's own interests in a more uninhibited manner. In 2008, 3 years after taking office, Angela Merkel held a speech in the Israeli parliament, the first ever by a German chancellor, where she declared, quote, "This historic responsibility is part of the Staatsräson of my country." Memory and atonement for the Holocaust now became the basis for the post-war German social contract, a new collective national pride at having come to terms with a past better than any other nation. Yes, I am not kidding you. Being German now meant your voice matters more on all things related to anti-Semitism and genocide.
Importierter Hass, Antisemitismus auf Deutschlands Straßen.
Wir haben es hier mit einer extremen Form.
So what if you're in Germany and you're not German, or if you don't look like a white German? Well, this means that you have yet to earn this badge of German pride. In the next part, we will learn how Germany, home to the largest Palestinian diaspora in Europe, launched an offensive on activists and migrants, not only through violence, but also through painting them as the new carriers of anti-Semitism. We will look concretely how self-declared leftists have established themselves in dominant media and state institutions to wage a propaganda war akin to conspiracy theory lunacy, invoking concepts of imported or post-colonial anti-Semitism to serve the needs of an increasingly reactionary capitalist regime and its project to outsource its fake Nazi guilt to Muslims.
Ehren wir die Freiheit. Arbeiten wir für den Frieden. Halten wir uns an das Recht. Dienen wir unseren inneren Maßstäben der Gerechtigkeit. Schauen wir am heutigen 8. Mai, so gut wir es können, der Wahrheit ins Auge.